we are in a situation where the great challenges that in some ways have certainly contributed to, greatly in many cases, to the rise of populism, to the rise of populist leaders with easy solutions, issues such as migration, have their roots in climate change. It's happening now, regardless of who one thinks is responsible, whether it's anthropocentric, as 99% of all scientists would believe, or whether it's sunspots or whatever. Climate change is happening. As it happens, resources are starting to become scarce. The price of those resources, the value of those resources, is being occupied by those who have power in certain societies, and those in the margins are being pushed out. That's not a theory. Anybody who knows West Africa, who knows East Africa, particularly Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea, can tell you that those are the big sources of migration in Europe. And in the future, the small island developing states in the Indian and Pacific Oceans will be faced with the same challenges. And for them, that is an existential challenge. Those are the challenges for the future. How we respond to those challenges will determine what world we live in. And that means we have to work together. So we have to rise above the day's headlines, the year's headlines, and find a way of helping those areas who are amongst the first affected and unfortunately the least able to respond to those changes, because it's not simply out of humanitarian response, although humanitarian response is part of it, but because whether it's Central America and migration towards the United States, whether it's Africa and the Middle East, movement towards Europe, or the Pacific towards Australia and New Zealand, because believe me, those are where the people are going to go. And there is no single government policy that can deal with that. It has to be dealt with on a collective level. The challenge is enormous. The challenge is so big that we have to persuade people that it's real. But it's a challenge that will not go away. I'm often reminded of the image of the little Dutch boy with his finger in the dike. Because as soon as you block up one hole, others will appear. So we cannot hide from that reality. We have to react. We have to ensure that we can, to some extent, mitigate, even if we cannot avoid the changes. We have to prepare for it. We have to have a set of policies agreed on a global level that will allow us to deal with the inevitable effects of climate change. First of all, it's going to hit the most marginal, but we would be kidding ourselves to think that it will not hit home, sometimes very close to home. Whether it's bushfires, we've had some experience here, tragically, but look at Australia. Every year, climate change is real, climate change is happening. And we must all, whether we're from Europe, whether we're from Australasia, whether we're from the Americas, Africa, we have to work together to deal with the effects of the express train that is coming down the line. I believe that the European Union can provide an example. Why do I say that? Because the European Union is a country, is a region where Malta, currently exercising the presidency of the European Union, with a very small population, has a say. It's not might is right. It's not the biggest country that can impose its will. It is a model of cooperation which is at times frustrating. I'm sure Martin can attest to that. In getting funds out of the European Union, it's never the easiest of challenges. But it's one that does work, and it gives everybody a voice. And as the world slowly comes to the realization that we're facing this challenge, the smallest have to have that voice. Whether it's the Marshall Islands, whether it's the Maldives, and believe you me, the Maldives is a case in point. You have millionaire resorts that live side by some of the highest rates of poverty. The two, ne'er the twain shall meet. But I remember very vividly going with the then President Mohammed Nasheed to see an island called Commando, which only exists because they had to borrow large concrete blocks from the port in Mali, the capital, to put the whole way around the island to protect the village. That's not a projection in the future. That is happening, or was happening, 3 or 4 years ago. That is a country, very small country, very weak country with very little influence. But it runs the risk of being wiped off the map. And what we cannot do is pretend that that is somebody else's problem. That because they're small, because they're isolated, that is not a symptom of what is to come. So Europe's challenge, real challenge, is to participate actively in making a reality of a slogan some of you may have heard, which is effective multilateralism. Because that is the only way we can deal with the global challenge to our existence, is through, however unsatisfactory some may feel it is, agreements such as the Paris Agreement, and putting that into practice, changing the way we do things. And that doesn't mean being anti-business. That doesn't mean taking some sort of Paleolithic approach to the economy. I believe that, for instance, the recent agreement the European Union has signed with Canada will allow so-called green technologies, renewable technologies, inbuilt in that agreement are the means to make those technologies economically viable, to get a buy-in from the private sector. Because if it's viable, it'll be on the market. If it's new technology, viable technology, it has a sustainable future. And that is as much business friendly, far more business friendly, I would argue, than reopening mines in the Midwest of the United States to mine coal. So we have to work pragmatically. We have to deal with climate change head on. That will need both public and private sector working together. But it also means that we have to listen to those voices who are in the front line. Because much like in war, the light infantry are the first to go under the gun. And those are the small, marginal countries who are experiencing climate change now. And that is one area which, as head of delegation for New Zealand, where we work closely with New Zealand in the Pacific to reduce fossil fuel dependency and provide energy through solar energy to many of the small developing nations in the Pacific. It's a small brick in a huge construction, but it's one we all have to participate in. And I believe very firmly that without being complacent about the future of the European Union, that the European Union has a positive role to play. It must play it, and it will play with its partners such as New Zealand and the small island developing states and the countries of Africa, because many of our other problems, huge though they may be, have at their root the greatest challenge that we face, that of climate change. Thank you.